Welcome to Postpartum Unfiltered.
The podcast where we get real about what happens during the postpartum period.
I am Jillian,
And I'm Sarah.
and we are two doctor moms who are not prepared for what postpartum would bring.
By sharing your stories, we hope to spread awareness and allow other families to be more prepared for the time after birth.
Sarah, hi.
Hey, Jill. How are
So,
you?
I'm exhausted. You?
Uh, Well, I'm sure we were after Saturday and we had all those bunch of kids at the
I
birthday
know.
party.
I know.
I knew there was gonna be a lot of kids, but I didn't know how many kids there were gonna be. And it's I feel like all of our county's kids were in that one playground.
I feel really bad for my kids when we do stuff like that. I don't know if you guys played. They had the little car that you can push the kids in at the little
Yeah,
indoor playground part that was set up like a street. And my kids were
yeah,
like, oh, we want to do that. We want to do that. And I said, okay, let's go wait in line. Right. And there wasn't really a line, it was mostly just chaos. And my kids just
yes.
sat there patiently. And all these kids kept cutting in front of them. And the parents kept pulling their
Aw.
kids out. And my kids kept trying to get in, and another kid would get in. And then one finally got in, and the other one was pushing. And then this kid just came out of nowhere and just slammed into
Oh my
the
gosh.
one pushing. It just took over. And I was like, that's my child. Okay.
Well, I don't know if you saw Aiden was he disappeared during the birthday party, and I was like, hey, it's time to cut cake. And I find him in that town with a pretend syringe, giving a shot to somebody. I was like, sir,
Yeah. He's like, Mom,
this
don't
is the
worry. I
birthday
got it.
party. Stop,
I got
stop
it.
working.
Yeah. I just gotta take care of this patient real quick. And then I'll be in for cake.
You don't even know this person who we giving the shot to right now.
He's like, some kid. Yeah, some 8-year-old ran over my 2-year-old immediately, and I was like, okay. But
It's
the
yeah, it's
kids
where
had a
are the
great
parents?
time.
Where are the parents?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get that parents take their kids there so that they can get a break, but it's just, I feel like I always had an awareness of where my body was in space, and so it's like I wouldn't have run over a child in that
Right.
situation when I was 7 or 8 years old. So it's very bizarre to me that it happens, and it always happens to my littlest
Hmm.
guy.
Aw.
Yeah, he's fine though. He just bounces off of people and he's right back in action.
Did he have a good time though?
Oh my God, they
Minus
had so
that.
much fun. They didn't want to leave. It's like, we have
Okay.
to go. I got them to go by telling them we were going to Costco. And then they say, we get
Oh,
samples? Yeah, buddy, we're going to get some samples.
so it brings me to Costco too.
Yeah, totally. How else would I know what to buy? Okay. Well, today, let's get to our guest. Let's get to our guest. Today we have Amanda. She is an associate professor of English and writing and a writing center director at Central Connecticut State University. She also serves as an editor-in-chief for Literary Mama. She co-edited My Caesarean, 21 Mothers on the C-Section Experience. Her writing and research have been published in numerous publications, and her Writing Center Journal article on composing an anti-racism and social justice statement in a rural writing center won the Council of Writing Program Administrators Award. Welcome, Amanda. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Amanda, to get started, is there anything you want to kind of start with as far as your birth or pregnancy that you think is relevant to your story?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I wasn't sure where we would start, but I had this experience over the weekend where I took my partner to the emergency room because we went to urgent care and then they sent us to the emergency room.
Oof.
And we were there for a very long time, and it was pretty terrible because there were a lot of people and it was a 10-hour wait. Um, and everything was um, nothing worked. Like the vending machines didn't work, the phone chargers didn't work. There were people shouting help. And as I was sitting there, really triggered because I started, and I didn't realize why until later. But I realized that I was a little bit triggered because I ended up going back to the emergency room after I came home from having my baby in Tucson. And that was a really strange experience that involved, at one point they wheeled me out of the room that I was in and just left me in the hallway for like 90 minutes and piled everything on top of me. I just had a C-section. My
Whoa.
baby wasn't with me. And no one checked on me for about 90 minutes. And before a room opened up for me. So for some reason, that's what I I started thinking about today when I was thinking about coming on this podcast.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because I had this recent experience.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
That's
90 minutes is
wild.
a long
And
time.
like,
All
so
right.
did you have a planned C-section?
No, I gave birth in Tucson to my daughter. I had gone to a birthing clinic, a midwife clinic. And so it was one of those situations where there were 12 or 13 midwives, and whoever was, on shift at the time of labor and delivery would deliver the baby. So you see all of them over the course of your pregnancy and
Mhm.
get to know all of them. And I went a week over, and they sent me to the hospital to get an ultrasound, and they said the amniotic fluid was low and that they would need to induce labor.
Oh,
And
wow.
so the induction began in the hospital and nothing happened.
Mm.
And eventually they said it went on for about 2 days. They had what's it called? What's the thing called that they give you to induce labor? It starts with a P.
Pitocin?
Pitocin.
Pitocin?
Yes, I was full of Pitocin for a while, and pretty much in fake painful labor, but not
Yeah, yeah.
really. And then they eventually said, we have to do a C-section. So
Wow.
um, they did the C-section. And um, after I got home, they actually, when they discharged me from the hospital, I hadn't taken a shit yet. And so I had an
Oh
impacted
no.
bowel.
Oh, yikes.
So I got home, I have a newborn. My husband at the time was there. My mom and dad had flown out to Arizona from Illinois to see me, and I had to leave her immediately and go back to the emergency room because was in so much pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so it was not a great experience.
So when you went back, how long were you in the hospital for the impacted bowel?
I was there for, I would say, a little over
Okay.
24 hours.
Okay.
So they gave me a bunch of fluid to help me, and eventually movement happened.
Oh,
And
thank God.
I remember yeah, I remember when I was in that hallway, they had piled up like the liquid that I was supposed to be drinking and a pump. They just like put a pump in the bed with
Hmm.
me, and I was just laying there because I had to get out of that room because a car accident was coming in.
Yikes.
Oh wow.
So that was, yeah.
Hmm.
So how did that impact your healing after the C-section and everything else?
It was really difficult. I have met people who have had C-sections and somehow they're walking around
Hmm.
like a few days later and they're just like,
Mhm.
everything's fine. For me, um, I remember coming home after the emergency room visit, and the next day I tried to just take a walk down the block, and it was like I was just shuffling a few steps at a time. It was very painful to get up. It was, it felt like, it almost felt like my guts were going to come out of me whenever I
Mhm.
stood up.
Yeah, totally.
Um, and then you're trying to nurse at the same time. And when you have a C-section, everything slows down in your body. And so it makes it doubly difficult to breastfeed. But that was the one thing that I really, really wanted to do
So did you have
after having that
trouble with
experience.
your supply or with latching?
I did. Yeah. She was good with latching and not huge problems with that. The problem was I could never pump enough. So we had to do a mix when I wasn't around
Yeah.
because I could only
Yeah,
pump
that's
like
like
this
me.
much.
I could only pump that much, so I had to supplement with
Yeah.
formula.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pumping's the
but when
worst.
she was there with me, everything was fine. She was definitely getting enough
Right.
milk. So There was just something about the pump. I just could never get anything going there.
How
Remember,
long
I
did
see
you
videos of
breastfeed?
women like, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, how long did you breastfeed?
Oh, and I think, like, how long did I breastfeed? I think till she was about 3.5.
Oh, wow. That's
Oh,
super impressive.
yeah. I did not expect that
Yeah, yeah.
answer.
We've got
Well, for
some
the
sort of
last,
surprise for
I think,
her. We should have some sort of prize for her.
Yeah,
yeah, I
exactly.
should get a prize.
You
Yeah,
should. Three and a
No,
half is a long
you
time.
earned it.
I think it was such a good way to bond after, when you get a C-section, at least with my experience, you see the baby and then they're like, bye, and they leave and they're
Yeah,
sewing you up. And everyone got to hold the baby and be with the baby before I did.
yeah, that's
And that
tough.
was strange. And so it was really important to me to have that bonding. And for a while, probably like the last year of nursing, it was only her coming in to our room in the morning and
Mm,
nursing for about 15 minutes.
mm.
And then that was it. But I still was producing milk.
Oh,
And one day she came in there and she said she nursed and then she finished and she said, "I'm done."
oh,
And she never nursed again.
That's
And I
wild.
didn't even
smart
I didn't
girl.
even realize that was the last time.
Right. She's like, I'm done, done. Yeah. No,
She was
Bye,
not
mom.
done.
yeah, not this time, just
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
That's
So
so
that was
kids are
that
so
was
funny.
strange.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
so funny. Yeah.
kids tell the truth, like straight. There's nothing in between, which
Yeah.
is
They don't
nice.
care about your
They
feelings.
do.
No.
No, they definitely don't.
Do not
Yeah.
care.
So
So
when you were told that you had a C-section, was that something you were kind of prepared for in a way? Like, okay.
No, I wasn't prepared for it. I was so arrogant about it, I would say, because I thought, oh, you get a C-section if there's an emergency or if a doctor needs to schedule something, or if you just didn't work hard enough.
mm,
Oh.
And I feel awful saying that aloud right now, but that is kind of the assumption that I went in with.
right.
And I thought I didn't even read about C-sections because
Mm,
I thought there's no way. Every time they started talking about anything that was like epidural C-sections, it made me a little sick to my stomach. And I was way more into the idea and watching videos of people giving birth naturally, whether in water or elsewhere. And I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. I would rather experience that
mhm.
kind of pain than this other kind of pain.
Yeah.
And I just was very naive about it.
What were you gonna ask, Jill?
I don't remember. So
Oh,
doesn't matter. We'll,
I cut you off. I'm
we're
so
gonna
sorry.
we'll just keep flowing. So how did that like, you felt kind of a way about like the C-section thing will never happen to me. I don't have to worry about it. And then that's the circumstance in which you found yourself. And then you didn't get to hold your baby right away. They abandoned you out in the hallway for some reason. And then you had this other medical issue right afterwards. So did you have any emotional struggles when you're early postpartum because of your experience giving birth?
Yeah. Um, I think I think I think two things. I think I felt like a failure on two levels. On the first level, it's just because I had this surgery that I didn't expect to have. And I never dilated very much.
Mhm.
And that was incredibly disappointing to me. Like my body had just not done the thing it was supposed to do. I had read Ina May's book. I was ready to go. I was gonna like do this. I was gonna squat and have this baby, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And my body just didn't do that for me. And there were probably a lot of reasons. Um, just all of the steps that happened probably
Mm,
contributed to that. But at the time I just felt like a failure, and that then bled into just feeling this deep sense of failure about not even being able to walk,
Yeah.
not being able to really bend very well, and my husband at the time sort of doing everything because I
Yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah.
That's always hard when someone else or your husband's doing everything and you're used to being the one to do everything and you feel like, oh, like I don't know, I still have a hard time letting you do everything. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard.
What
It
was
is.
it? Did
Yeah.
you have any of like coughing while recovering from a C-section or sneezing? Do you have any of those like
Oh
early
yeah,
experiences? I
so
hear it's
painful.
horrifying.
It is because they put one of those wraps around me that
Uh,
you might use for your lower back or something if you have an injury.
hmm
And I remember relying on that so much, that Velcro thing, and just making it as tight as possible. And every time I took it off, it really felt like my body was going to just fall apart. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was very painful.
Yeah. I
How
feel like
long? Oh, go ahead.
I was just say I feel like one thing that I'm like so furious that nobody told me about postpartum is that it wouldn't feel like anything was holding my organs in anymore. You know,
Oh yeah, we
like
talked
Yes.
about that on one of our episodes. Yeah, that's
yeah,
true.
like you think like, yeah, okay, my uterus expanded. I know my abdominal muscles are stretching because of that, but I didn't realize I would feel like a Ziploc bag full of liquid instead of a container,
Mushy.
like
Just
yeah.
mushy.
Well, I would sit down
Yep.
and it was like, oh, is that part of my intestines like over my pants now somehow? Like it was just like I was never so aware of all of these organs in my abdomen because they were never just out in the world,
Right, right, exactly.
And I didn't
Yeah.
have my abdomen cut open and my organs moved around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Now, how long did you have pain from the C-section? You said you had pain for a little while. How long did that last for you?
I had pain for beyond the 6 weeks
Oh,
postpartum.
wow.
And I also developed what's it called? Hypertrophic scar. So it was all
Oh,
raised.
Oh,
hmm
like a
A
keloid.
keloid, like a
Yeah.
yeah.
keloid, yeah. And it was incredibly itchy. And at the time I was a grad student, I didn't have good medical insurance. And I went to see an OBGYN and she said, I don't know what that is, but
Oh,
it'll be fine. And then when I got my first job as a professor, I went to a dermatologist because I actually had insurance at this point, and they were like, "Well, that's a keloid. We're just going to inject it." But I had no
Mhm.
idea. So for the first 5 years no, 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 sorry, the first 3 years of my daughter's life, it was just this incredibly itchy thing, and I know it sounds silly that I didn't understand what it was, but I just thought, oh, this is just something that I'm going to have to live with.
did you have any
Um,
other scars in your life from any other injuries or anything that formed keloids? Or had all your
no,
other scars healed well?
all of my other scars have healed well.
How
Yeah,
interesting.
so
Do
that
they
was
have
weird.
any idea why that happened?
Nobody, nobody seemed to know.
Interesting.
Mm,
Yeah,
So at what
yeah.
yeah, and
point,
so.
oh, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, then when you were talking about how it feels like your organs are spilling out, you're also thinking about like when you start reading about C-sections, there's all this stuff about, oh, organs might fuse together.
Oh, that's
Or,
horrifying. I've
yeah. And
never heard.
so because there are stitches on the inside and on the
Yeah.
outside. And so what's happening in there and how might that be causing issues? And actually last summer I um I had surgery, uterine artery embolization surgery, because I had a fibroid that was about the size of a grapefruit. Well,
My
actually bigger than a
goodness.
grapefruit
Oh
on
my God.
my in my uterus.
Yeah.
And um I wonder, you know,
Yeah.
if the C-section caused that.
Correlated. Yeah.
Right.
I wonder. Yeah, it could be. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point did you decide I want to talk to other women about their C-section experiences and then I'm going to write a book about it?
Um, well, it's interesting because a poet named Rachel Moritz, who also co-edited the collection, she posted something on Facebook about some sort of gentle C-section that happened in the UK, meaning that the person who was having the C-section watched what happened, which I could never do. And then there was skin to skin, and it was just it was more like a birth where you do skin to skin immediately and everything's good and you're and and all of these people responded to it, including me, and were sharing their stories. And as everyone was sharing their stories, there was another writer that I know named Kathleen Glasgow. She's a YA author, and she said, we should write a book, or we should edit a book about this.
Yeah.
And so we got together and we shared our stories with each other. We started with the three of us just writing our stories because we had three very different stories about cesareans. And we realized that there's there isn't a whole lot out there about it, and there weren't any books that focus solely on that subject that were collections of essays.
Right.
So we kind of started with that. Um,
That's
and
awesome.
when we put out a call for essays, we got a ton of them.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
How did you
amazing.
narrow it down?
How do we narrow it down? Well, the first thing was which ones are written well, right? So that,
Mhm.
you just kind of move things aside that weren't fully developed yet.
Mm.
But then based on types of experiences. So we tried to get a range of backgrounds and experiences, whether it be age, whether it be race or ethnicity, whether it be certain identities.
Yeah.
Um, and we kind of, we did the best we could with that. In some cases, it meant we went out and asked people who we had seen write about their births already,
Mm.
and said, "Would you be interested in contributing to this?" Um, and yeah, we put it together based on that, and we both it ended up just being Rachel and me because in the middle of this whole process, Kathleen decided she was going to be a best-selling author. So she was like, "I don't have time for this," and we're like, "Okay, fine."
Thanks, Kathleen.
So what were
Yeah, thanks,
some
Kathleen.
rude.
Yeah.
What were some common themes or things that you noticed that stood out to you in these stories that you were reading?
I think most people in the stories had this, were trying to circle around that feeling of that they fucked something up in the
Mm.
process.
Yeah, like they
And
they failed or their body failed, and that is how they
That's why
ended
they
at
yeah,
a C-section.
yeah,
Yeah,
very
that's tough.
like classic mother-centric kind of feeling that we have, right?
right.
Mm.
But some people had positive stories about it. There was one person who said, I decided I wanted a C-section from the beginning, and she wrote a really good story about it. There was someone who had endured many abdominal surgeries before she had three children. Um, and so she said, I had to do this, and here's why I had to do it. There was someone who um, her first child died shortly after she gave birth to him because they waited too long to do a C-section.
Ugh,
And
that's
so,
horrifying.
this
That would,
range of stories, like for her, I think she says this at some point, the C-section was life,
Yeah.
meant life.
yeah. Yeah.
So it was very good to hear that because at the end of the day, even though I felt like my experience was dramatic and traumatic, it helped to see that it was pretty mundane actually compared to other people, but
Mm.
also that there was a hunger for to read about these stories, and specifically after, the
Mhm.
experience, like in the years after, and how
Yeah.
people reflected on
What do you think after reading all the kind of stories and you guys talking about it? What's like the biggest, like the most common misconception you think women have when they think about C-section or what they thought it would be?
it. That's a good question. I think one of the common misconceptions is that it's just like any other surgery, just a
Hmm.
regular old day at the surgery, in the surgical room or in the OR.
Mm.
Um, and that, it's something that people do to make things easier for themselves. So when it's a pretty serious surgery.
It
And I
is.
think
Yeah.
everyone who endured it, or who endured it in this collection at least, was a little surprised by that.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
always
And
surprised
I
when, oh, go on.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I was to say, I'm always surprised when I ask people, have you ever had any surgeries? And they'll say, no. Oh, well, I had three C-sections. And I'm like, you had three major
That's pretty
abdominal
big surgery. I
surgeries?
agree with that.
Like,
100% agree with that. 100%. I'm like, that's surgery, man.
Yeah,
yeah. And it's
Pretty big
always like,
surgery.
it's
nah,
huge.
yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they
I
cut
was
open your
talking with
abdomen.
someone, yeah, yeah. I was talking with someone of a week or so ago who broke her femur,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and she said that at one point the doctors asked her how close it was to giving birth to her children. She's like, "Why are you asking?" And they were like, "Because giving birth is one of the most painful experiences, and this is akin to that. Breaking your femur and giving birth are very similar in terms of how they classify pain."
Oh,
Interesting.
And
okay.
it just reminded me again, we this is an everyday thing that women go through, and we treat it as if it's not as painful as it is, whether you have a
Yeah.
C-section or not.
Yeah.
I
I've
think
had a
that's
lot of people think like it's the easy way out sometimes too.
Yeah.
And that comes more, I think, from planned C-sections, but there's a lot of reasons to have a planned C-section. I don't want to have a vaginal birth, but even if you don't want to have a vaginal birth, birth is still birth. There's a human in your
birth
body
is
that
still
needs to
birth.
come out. A human.
Right.
Yeah. And it's the feeling that also that you're not strong enough. That's how I felt.
Mm,
Because I remember, reading posts from, I remember reading a post from a dad that I knew whose wife had given birth naturally, and talked about how she was on her hands and knees and she gave birth to their child that way. And I
Mhm.
remember feeling, and I know it's not about me because it's really cool that she did that, but like I remember feeling like I wasn't strong enough.
right.
I
Yeah, I thought
hadn't
that
been
too.
strong enough.
I didn't want to do any intervention. Um, and I ended up getting an epidural because it was too much and I felt like this is bullshit. Like I know all these other people who have done it and like I'm stronger than them, but they could do it without medication, and
Yeah.
like it even one of my favorite stories is after I had my first son, my father-in-law was visiting and said, "How long was labor?" And I said 38 hours. And he said, "You weren't pushing that whole time, so like that doesn't really count." And I said, "Well, why don't you try it and tell me what counts?" And my mother-in-law almost like
Yeah.
fell out of her stool laughing because I just don't think he'd ever thought about it. My mother-in-law she's got some funny birth stories from having my husband and his brothers, but they're pretty cool. Like she gave birth 15 minutes after getting to the hospital one of the times, and it was just like, boop,
Wow.
now we have a baby, and I was like, how nice would that be? you know? Um,
Yeah.
so I think like people just don't think about it. And then when you've never done it, you think whatever you think for whatever reason. So when somebody else is telling you, no, no, and I think talking about your experience in any sort of negative way has been taboo for so long. So like, my father-in-law is almost 80 years old, so he's probably never met another woman who would tell him anything negative about their birth
Right. Right.
experience anyway.
Well, there used to be
So
a time where they weren't even allowed in the room, right? So
yeah,
it would just be just the woman
my
giving birth
yeah,
alone. So a
my
lot of
Yes.
my
times they
dad,
wouldn't even see it. So they'd be like, "Oh, the baby's here. Oh, she's, being dramatic, or it's really not that bad," because they never even saw it for a long time.
Yeah.
yeah, my
I
my mom
remember,
was alone in the
oh,
hospital
sorry.
at night. My dad couldn't, dads used to not be able to stay at the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where my
I
parents are from,
remember,
the fathers aren't even in the room. They don't let the
yeah.
fathers in the room where my parents are from.
Yeah, it was the same for my mom with my brother, but somewhere between when he was born and when I was born, they changed that. So she had two completely different delivery experiences. When he was born, he was born in a Catholic hospital, and my dad wasn't there, and the nurses just came in and bound her chest and didn't
What?
ask her if
Why?
they could do that. And they just assumed that she wasn't going to nurse.
Why?
Oh, I've never
That was in
heard of that.
1972. What?
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, why?
I have never heard of that either, but that happened
We
to my mom,
just
in this
like we
Catholic
just
I was
hospital.
assume
following the story and then I was
is
like,
that
what?
is that a Catholic thing?
I don't
I
know.
gotta
I
Google
don't
it. I'm
know,
gonna
but
write it
she said
down.
somebody came in and wrapped my chest and said, "Okay, this will help dry up your milk." And she was like, I was so out of it that I just was like, okay,
Oh my
you
God.
know? And this came up when I was asking her about breastfeeding, like, why didn't you
Yeah.
breastfeed us, man? Like, I was giving her a hard time, which now I feel super bad about. So,
She's like, I
Should
came
have
home
wanted
from
to,
the
but
hospital looking like a mummy, so I couldn't do
yeah.
it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
oh my gosh,
That's
that's insane. Yeah, I
yeah.
have to look that up. I'm gonna
I'm
look
looking
that
at
up.
Googling it
Bizarre.
later. I'll get
Oh,
back to you
okay,
in the
yeah.
show notes.
It's funny because I've never Googled that. So, yeah.
1972 Catholic hospitals chest wrap.
Binding chest,
Yeah.
binding feet I've heard. Binding chest I have not.
Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, that
Yeah.
has to be painful. Oh my God.
It's what it's just the whole process is wild. Talking about the like most women with the C-sections feeling like their body was failing them, were most of them or a lot of them also experiencing issues with breastfeeding? Because like it depends on the circumstances of your C-section, but you might not have that much oxytocin coming down the pipe
Hmm.
when you have a C-section birth. So I assume a lot of them maybe have a trouble with their milk letdown or flow or even starting. And then if so, did they also express feeling like they had failed in some way or their body wasn't strong enough or something along those lines because breastfeeding was difficult?
That was a question that I had after that book was published, weirdly enough, because I didn't see a whole lot of that in there.
Mm,
I'm not even sure it's if I put it in my essay, but I thought about that afterward because I was so determined to breastfeed her for so long.
yeah.
So I'm the book was published in 2019 and I haven't really read it since
Yeah.
because I had to read it a zillion times. But
Sure.
I but yeah, so I would have to go back and look at that, but I don't think that was a feature of this book, which is very interesting. And in the years since I've wondered, should there be somebody needs to do a breastfeeding collection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. I don't, Sarah, maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't heard very many like, breastfeeding was right? Like people either loved it or hated it or had a great time or a terrible time with it. And that's so interesting
Yeah.
to me because I
Yeah.
Right.
think,
It's either or extreme. It's nothing like,
yeah,
yeah.
one, it's kind of like it kind of goes along with birth, right? Birth is supposed to be natural. So, like, of course, I'm supposed to just be able to go in and labor and have my baby and then come home like it's any other day. Like I should be able to nurse and my baby should latch and it should be this beautiful food that sustains them. And like both of those things can be a total shit show. And
Mhm.
then
Hmm.
what? Because they don't give us any expectations when we've never done it before. So people ask,
Right.
and Sarah and I have talked about the second child, and I tell people, they're like, is it easier? I'm like, no, not really, but I had better expectations. I had more realistic expectations for me and
Right.
the thing as a whole. And like I felt like a terrible failure because I struggled with breastfeeding and latching and I was producing enough milk, but I hated breastfeeding. I never felt the bonding that you talk about. Like I wanted so badly to get to that point where I felt like this amazing connection and bond with my child because of breastfeeding and I never got it. And I
Yeah, neither did
like
I.
it's making me almost want to cry now because I just like that's what I thought it would be. I thought it would be this big beautiful thing and it wasn't.
Yeah.
And
No,
it
I
felt like
agree.
it
I
was all
thought,
my fault.
yeah. Well, I thought like once the baby's born, then you just start breastfeeding. I didn't know there was like a day or 2 days or 3 days it takes to build it up. And then I just kept not producing enough. And I remember when I had the baby, they were like, oh, why are you using formula? You should be breastfeeding. Formula is not what you should be doing. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Let the baby starve? Like,
Yeah.
and I think like these things aren't really talked about ever.
Yeah.
It's just like you have a baby, you breastfeed, here you go. You know what I mean? You should be good to go. Like that's pretty much how much information you get.
And you're so tired afterwards.
Hmm.
This is what I remember. I remember a nurse coming in and I remember she was British, so it felt even more like she was scolding me when she was trying to help me. And
Uh,
she was like, the baby's, you're both snoozing and cruising. And I was like, what? And I just kept, every time we would just be like, and then the nurse would come in and be like, you have to feed her.
Like, and through these conversations, we hope that other people have realistic expectations versus not just going in and saying like I said, you have a baby and then you breastfeed and then that's it. There's like nothing in between. Like we hope that through this, like people can actually get their realistic expectations from our podcast. That's our
Yes,
goal.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And your book
So
sounds pretty awesome.
yeah, I was gonna say, so we're gonna have to link information for the book in the show notes. And anything else that feels important to share, Amanda?
I think this is good.
Thank you for listening to Postpartum Unfiltered.
If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, comment, or leave a review.
You can follow us on Instagram at postpartum.unfiltered.
If you feel called to share your postpartum experience, please contact us on Instagram or at drjilliancampbell.com.